Water brought most of our ancestors to this continent. And water took them westward into it. Water was their road to freedom and sometimes riches, their source of inspiration and adventure. That's also true on the driftwood for a group of young people right out of college. With video cameras, they embarked on a 25,000-mile voyage, gathering stories along the way. Their adventure took 3 years and covered the eastern part of North America from Nova Scotia to the Gulf of Mexico. They wanted to find out how the waterways influence our lives. And in turn, what we have done to the water. Travel with them to visit the places and meet the people they discovered along the way, like real cowboys along the western Gulf Coast. The people who live and work on a floating man-made island of steel, and a city that disappeared from the face of the earth one sleepy Texas afternoon and came back to live again. Join them on this leg of the journey as they travel the western Gulf on the intracoastal waterway, from the Mexican border to the Louisiana bayou. There's a story behind this story. It all began as an idea shared by a father and a son. But the son, an award-winning filmmaker, died in an auto accident. His father decided to go ahead with the project as a kind of memorial. He bought a 60-foot motor yacht, named it Driftwood, and outfitted it with television equipment. He hired a professional crew to run the boat. For this part of the trip, it was a husband and wife team, Patrick and Renee McCullers. Then he selected teams of Canadian and U.S. college graduates, young people who, like his son, wanted to share their discoveries with others. They signed on for about a month each. They got room and board, a salary, and a chance to help document what they saw on the waters. Bill Arnold from Canada's Mohawk College was one of the first selected. He became a permanent member of the Driftwood video crew.
A lot of the people that we've talked with are blue-collar, hard-working people, people sort of living on the edge.
Bill was joined by Tom Miller, a graduate of the University of Florida in Gainesville. He became the second permanent member of the Driftwood crew.
I got the feeling along the Texas-Louisiana Gulf Coast that the whole place had been hit by a bomb.
For this trip, Mike Tillotson came on board. He's a graduate of the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse University.
When I first saw Driftwood, I was very impressed, and I was very excited about the project. I consider myself a very lucky person.
This part of their journey began in Brownsville, Texas, a true border town. Only the Rio Grande separates it from Mexico.
The influx of the people that are traveling the Rio Grande is just phenomenal. There's absolutely no way to combat that.
We were shooting from the bridge right on the U.S.-Mexico border. Next thing you know, they jump in the water, swimming around. And I'm looking over there. Next thing you know, I see them swimming across. I go to Tom, hey, look, there's somebody swimming across.
We saw a lot of people wanting to come into the United States and look for work, hoping for a better economy than they have in Mexico.
And in general, that's what they find. That's why each month, almost 1 million Mexicans legally cross the border at Brownsville. No one knows how many more enter illegally. They come to find work as domestics, as day laborers, as construction workers, and some get jobs on the shrimp boats. There's money in shrimping, and fishermen have been doing it commercially on the western Gulf for half a century. They used to go out in sailboats using seine nets near the shore. But with the advent of the gasoline engine, shrimping took off. 400 boats work out of the port of Brownsville. At first blush, this section of the waterway seems quite peaceful, but just under the surface, there are conflicts. And that's true all along the Gulf Coast.
I felt there was a lot of tension in the air because the Mexicans have come in, and from the point of view of people who have lived there a long time and have worked there and are struggling to make a living, more people who need to make a living, it's not going to help them. And so there's perhaps some prejudice there. They blame the Mexicans.
I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Buster who owns and operates a shrimping fleet, and he had told us that 90% of the shrimp fleet at his area, at his port, were Mexicans.
Started off as a header and worked myself up as a boat owner. I've had my own boats for 16 years now.
Buster Harris has been a shrimp fisherman on the Gulf since 1957. He used to manage 22 shrimp boats. Now he's reduced to 12. One of his boats is run by Collins Ullman.
Shrimping seems like it's a little difficult type of life. You have to be a special kind of person to do it. And, I learned that from Collins.
People say, you know, the old shrimpers never die, they just smell that way.
Sometimes he goes out for like 20 days at a time, 20 days to a month.
I make extended trips. I have a large refrigerated vessel. Of course, it limits you with your family and things like that. I know that I missed a lot of opportunities watching my children grow and everything like that.
These people, they work all through the night. They'll drop the nets twice during the night.
If we're producing shrimp, we hardly back off them until they slack off. I've seen time where jobs going as much as 36 hours non-stop. And it doesn't happen near often enough now.
Shrimping is a tough way to earn a living these days. Buster has to invest $10,000 each time Collins and his crew go out. This pays for expenses like fuel and insurance. While these costs keep rising, the money he can get for a catch keeps falling.
Colin, is this a good catch?
Pardon me?
Is this a good catch?
Definitely not. No, this is a starvation here. The shrimp we recovered from was real small in proportion to the bottom trash fish and stuff, but actually that's about normal. Well, I tell you, we pick up just about anything. I've caught refrigerators, washing machines, pots and pans. I've got a salad bowl that I'm still using on the boat. I picked it up about 4 or 5 years ago, perfectly new, and I've caught Scotch whiskey. So you don't know what you're going to bring up for the decks.
Which brings up other problems. For every pound of shrimp caught, 9 pounds of sea life are pushed dead over the side. Sports fishermen complain this so-called trash fish includes juvenile species of flounder, trout, redfish, and whiting. Ecologists complain that catching anything and everything includes endangered species, like sea turtles.
There's so many restrictions being put on us there now that, I don't know, the future of the shrimping industry doesn't look that bright. What with TEDs coming up.
TEDs, or TEDs, stands for Turtle Excluder Device. In 1989, the government forced shrimpers to use them to protect the species. Basically, a TED is a net with a hole in it. That hole lets out the turtles that accidentally get caught. Simple if you want to save turtles. Not so simple if you want to catch shrimp.
It don't work for turtles, it don't work for shrimp, it don't work for fish, it don't work for anything.
Because you have to put such a large hole in the net. Anytime that a hole like that occurs naturally in the net, I put that rig on deck and repair it because I can't catch shrimp with a busted net.
Out in 18 years fishing, I probably caught 5 turtles. And all my crew members tell me the same thing, that, you know, I know people that's been fishing a lot longer than I had, and turtles was just never a problem on the Texas coast.
One person who would disagree with Buster Harris is Isla Lesher. He puts the blame squarely on the shoulders of this little 84-year-old woman.
But in my opinion, we have a lady down at Port Isabel they call the Turtle Lady. A lot of publicity are made about them, and everybody got excited about the turtles.
I do feel that as long as I'll be alive, there'll be need for help for all sea turtles.
Everybody in this part of Texas knows Isla. She's a single-minded woman who has worked with environmentalists and the federal government to protect turtles. About 30 years ago, Isla moved to Padre Island, which runs along the coast of Texas just east of Brownsville. There, Isla learned that the sea turtles were disappearing, and she took particular interest in the Kemp's Ridley, the most threatened of the species. The population of nesting female Ridleys has dropped nearly 99% in the last 40 years. And as usual, man is the main culprit. If the decline continues at this rate, the species will be extinct by the turn of the century. Isla began to take an active part in rescuing as many as she could.
I would get them when they were injured or when they were too small for them to actually go out and there was something wrong with them.
In 1978, Isla founded Sea Turtle Incorporated in order to protect the Kemp's Ridley sea turtle.
I think what she's trying to do is promote awareness so that kids and even adults will grow to like the turtle, and hopefully it will help save the turtle in that area.
Sweet creature, and he is in trouble. He is totally blind. He was hatched at A&M University in the laboratory. It is a way to teach the child to love the turtles. And I do know that if we can get them loving all of our animals that are out in the Gulf, that we'll have a much better world.
She's been on national news. She's been on a lot of other magazine programs, things of that nature. And she is bringing a lot of tourism into the island, which is great for South Padre Island.
As late as 1973, the island was virtually undiscovered by those outside of Texas. Then, new hotels were built. And as some places in Florida grew tired of the college crowd, here they began issuing invitations.
South Padre Island reminded me a little bit of a newer or a Fort Lauderdale before the spring break trend hit.
Trying to develop the whole area for tourism and recreation, but some places you can find tar on the beach, it sticks to your shoes. It's like putting up a carnival next to a garbage dump. You know, you want to create this nice atmosphere, but yet offshore you have the potential for oil spills and all sorts of things to wash up on the beach.
The Padre Islands are particularly vulnerable to that kind of problem. They stretch from Brownsville all the way to Corpus Christi, forming a barrier between the mainland and the Gulf. It's the gateway to the intracoastal waterway. Part of it was formed by nature, part a man-made channel. The intracoastal follows the shoreline for 2,500 miles, providing a protected passage for boats.
In Texas, as we were traveling along the waterway with driftwood, we'd see cattle right up to the water's banks, feeding and whole herds of them out there.
1/6 of America's beef comes from Texas. One of the pioneers in the cattle business was a steamboat captain, Richard King. He ran supplies along the Rio Grande and Gulf Coast during the Mexican War. He saw value in the harsh, mesquite-filled land along his route. So in 1853, he began buying it, building the huge empire known as the King Ranch. Since then, the King estate has sold off some of its holdings. One of those was the 10,000-acre Rio Paisano Ranch, and that's where the driftwood crew went next.
We, of course, had all preconceived ideas what the ranch was going to be like. A Texas ranch, get out and lasso some cattle and so on, which is exactly what we found.
horse's name? Don't have a name.
No?
No.
All right.
Don't have a name. That's not easy to do it.
I bet it's not. I don't know if...
Well, like that. Kind of like that.
All right.
That's good.
Sure. Hold it, sure.
Got the furnace one side.
I had never seen a full-scale cattle ranch before. And you get there and you see there are people who actually use the lariat and lasso things as a part of their work. So yeah, this is why I'm not a cowboy.
That's what we do every day, and that's what our entertainment is also, as we go to a rope.
Tom Hogan is manager of Rio Paisano Ranch.
We work about 7 days a week. That's just the way of ranch life. You don't do this job if you think you're going to work 40 hours a week. It's a life. You live the ranch if you're going to do this kind of work. We've been fortunate here in that everybody that's with us right now has been with us quite a while. A lot of them, like Baldo and Raul, have been here a number of years.
It's a great life being a cowboy. It is. I mean, if you enjoy what you're doing, it's a great life.
Raul Cuellar, Rio Paisano's cattle foreman, grew up on a ranch in Texas close to the Mexican border. The story is a little different for Baldo Monasterio.
I found his story is very interesting, that he had to swim across the Rio Grande to come into this country to work.
And I worked like maybe one night, all night. The next day, we found this guy here in Ricardo, Texas, and he gave me work for 2 weeks, and then he find this job for me.
Baldo came to us as an illegal alien, and you know, it's no secret everybody down in this country employed illegal aliens. As my philosophy on it was, anytime that I could get somebody to come through the front gate that would do the work that those boys will do for the number of hours that they do, even if it's for minimum wage or for $5 an hour, I'd hire them.
He's giving people jobs and he's giving people opportunities. And if they're anybody, if those people are like Baldo, then they will eventually become citizens.
Because over there, there's not enough work for all the Mexicans. So if these people let me work here, maybe I'll bring my family over here. I feel like this is the best for me. Yeah, I like this work.
Like the Gulf Coast itself, the endless stretch of Texas plains handed out a challenge to the first settlers who came here. Little did they know what riches lay below the surface of that Texas hardscrabble, just waiting to be tapped. The lid blew off in 1901 when they discovered vast reserves of oil in southeast Texas. 80 years later, it accounted for more than a quarter of the state's economy, some $65 billion a year. With oil came wealth and jobs and a quality of life no one thought would end. But by the mid-'80s, Arab oil glutted world markets. In 5 months, the price of crude oil dropped from over $30 a barrel to less than 10. The effect along the Gulf Coast was devastating. Refineries cut back production, and people in all walks of life lost their jobs. Some of the great cities that oil helped build now look like movie sets waiting to be taken down after the final scene. Cities like Corpus Christi. Some towns whose fortunes were not quite so directly tied to the oil business are a little better off. One is Port Aransas, which lies 30 miles to the northeast of Corpus Christi. It's always been a fishing port. Usually, when the driftwood pulls in, she draws a lot of attention. She's a large craft by most standards. But in Port Aransas, there was a much bigger attraction.
You cannot help but see this vessel, which is tied up, and it's the size of it is the first striking thing that you notice about it.
Her name is the Pollyanna, and she was built by commercial fisherman John Nixon.
It's just kind of like a hobby, too. Some people build little boats, I build big ones.
He's a classic American type, the entrepreneur, a guy with a better idea, a guy with a dreamer's eye and a worker's hand.
There's no design to it. I mean, there's no blueprints or anything. I probably couldn't build another one like it. It just whatever I just come to, I guess. Kind of like an artist, I guess. A lot of people thought, you know, you shouldn't put air conditioning in your bedroom, but there's certain places you got to put a few things you don't really want to. But a boat's going to be.
John's friends have learned not to question his way of doing things. He usually has a reason.
John has had several other single-hulled shrimp boats. And we have been told that John does not like rough water. So he went to this catamaran, which is a lot larger, and with the two hulls, should ride a lot smoother in the Gulf waters.
Which is the whole story of how Mr. Nixon came upon building this particular boat. He'd been out fishing one time, just in a regular standard fishing boat, and I guess it was in some rough seas, and he was rolling around, and he had seen a catamaran, just a sailboat, catamaran, just cutting, slicing through the water. He said, well, why can't I do something like that when I'm fishing?
Yeah, it's pretty hot in there. We're going up there and show you something else up there.
When the Pollyanna is finished, she will have cost John Nixon a total of $200,000 for a boat that's worth twice that.
About 75% of the boat is scrap iron. It's used oil field tanks. The oil production's down. They don't use the tanks, so they scrap them. So I'll find a guy that's scrapping them out, and I'll have him just scrap them out for me. All scrap metal, this is a piece of big old pipe, and cut it in quarters, and that makes a corner.
John isn't partial to scrap from the oil industry. Most anything useful from the junk heap will do.
Everything on this cabin, the wheelhouse part, is used something. The windows there come out of a Greyhound bus. I bought it off of a guy that he actually installed them, but the back window come out of Winnebago.
It seems like a perfect boat for commercial fishing. We've been on some smaller boats where people try to work out of, and it's cramped. And if you have to spend a lot of time out there like the longline fishermen do, you want something that's a little bigger. This thing approaches 100 feet, and I imagine when he's out there working, he's going to be the envy of all the other fishermen out there.
As driftwood headed northeast along the intracoastal waterway, other happy stories were in short supply. The oil crunch had hit hard. One of the few industries in the Gulf that boomed when oil prices fell was petrochemical production, like plastics, polyesters, and acrylics. The plants were set up here in the 1930s because of the warmer climate. And the key ingredients were here, oil and seawater. Texas City is a big petrochemical producer along the Gulf. And when the driftwood crew arrived, they found an active waterfront, yet it didn't seem to buoy their spirits much.
I didn't like Texas City at all. I just got a bad feeling when I was there. I didn't like the way it smelled. I didn't like the way it looked.
It wasn't a very pretty sight. It wasn't at all by any means.
But that's all in the eye of the beholder. People who live and work there see it differently.
Texas City is actually a very unique port in that it is a private port. It's not supported by any governmental authority, nor do they have any authority over the Port of Texas City.
Ken DeMette is president of the Texas City Terminal Railway, which acts as port authority over the 44 docks. He was around for the most terrible thing to happen in the history of Texas City.
In the middle 1940s, the Port of Texas City was developing its liquid cargoes. A lot of ammonium nitrate was being handled at that time. In April of 1947, April the 16th to be precise, this great, terrible Holocaust occurred. The night before April 16th, we don't know this for sure, but we surmise one of the longshoremen threw a lighted cigarette or a match into the hold of the SS Grand Camp. That morning, when they reported back to work, there was smoke coming out of that hold. A lot of the townspeople came down. because it was such a pretty pink smoke. What they decided to do was to put the lid on it and to introduce steam into it. These apparently were the two worst things they could have done. That was the first explosion at 9:12 a.m. the morning of April 16th, 1947. It killed a great number of people. That and the ensuing explosion killed 562 people, injured 4,000.
Wanda Lou Baker was right at the heart of the blast.
I was working down at Texas City Terminal, about a block down the street from where the ship blew up. And at the time, we had no idea what had happened. I didn't hear a sound. It just happened. The building just collapsed, and there were 4 people in our office that were killed. And then a very good friend of mine was killed instantly. And of course, you know, everybody in Texas City either had somebody or knew somebody that was killed in the blast. God is our hope and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore will we not fear, though the earth be moved and though the hills be carried into the midst of the sea. It's about what we felt like that's about what happened to us.
That's perfect.
This cemetery is here for the people who were killed during the explosion that were never identified. There were between 60 and 70. They just had parts of bodies, and they brought them out here, and they buried them.
A series of smaller explosions rocked Texas City for 3 days as oil storage tanks blew up one by one. But even before the smoke cleared, Wanda was back on the job.
We worked in a boxcar, a Santa Fe boxcar down at the depot. We set up office there. We had a stamp made that said no records due to the explosion. So everything we'd get, you know, any inquiry and all. But we started right away to clean up after it.
Wanda stayed with the company except for a few years when she was raising her family. Today, she's the last survivor of the explosion working there. On the 40th anniversary of the tragedy, the town erected a monument. It's a simple design, constructed around the actual propeller of the ship that blew up.
I think it's important to keep a memorial and just remember what happened. Because, you know, back then, nobody knew what ammonium nitrate was or what was in the ships. But now you talk to Wanda or whatever, and they have huge books that tell what each container car has in it and what to do if something happens, or, you know, what the hazardous material may do.
And so, as it usually works out, a measure of good is rescued from the bad. And that may be true for Texas City in general. If you look around the town, you see the signs of an economy down on its heels. There isn't even one operating movie theater in the entire place. But at least the port is still active. It's on Galveston Bay, just 30 miles southeast of Houston. "150 years ago, Houston was a humid frontier town on a bayou, 50 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. If it was ever going to amount to anything, people there realized they needed to create a navigable link to the ocean. So they dug a channel through the bayou to Galveston Bay, connecting their town to the markets of the world. Eventually, Houston became America's 3rd largest port.
A lot of the economy of Houston is based upon the shipping that goes on there, the exchange of goods from one ship to another, and the trading that takes place.
And the port that can get cargo on and off ships the cheapest will win the most business.
It might be more expensive for a ship to come up to the Houston port rather than to go like to Texas City, just for the travel-wise. But once they get the new Omniport put in, it might be able to move a lot more product faster, more efficiently, and it might be worth it in the long run.
When it opens, Omniport will be the first terminal of its kind in America. It's a multi-million-dollar project, but the concept is pretty simple. It's based on a high-tech conveyor that can be lowered directly into the holds of ships.
What they're experimenting with in this Omniport is a way to get rid of some of the manual labor and replace that, as they have in the past with a lot of other industries, with automation.
What used to take 12 men to do will now take 3. That worries some people, but not Doug Densmore, a pile driver supervisor for the new Omniport.
It'll increase product coming into the port, which will eventually possibly increase jobs. But this one particular facility, by the minimum people that are used, more vessels can come in, more cargo can go out, which area-wide will probably increase jobs. Let's say 30 stevedores will lose their job, but 40 truck drivers and cargo handlers will take their place. So it hurts one and it helps 2 others.
People who were once doing the physical labor may be out of work, but it's going to require more skilled people to operate the robotics and the computerization of it.
Right now, it's helping Doug and his crew. They've gotten the job of replacing the dock's old wooden pilings.
In this business, when work's real good, you hire. When work's real bad or gets low, you let them go. But this crew here, 5 of the 8 men on that barge have been with me over 12 years. The company I work for tries to keep us pretty busy. Myself, I believe the economy is getting better down here. This location has changed over from 90–95% oil related to everything else that it can bring in, businesses and as such. Shipping all up and down the channel is starting to change over too.
It's clearly the best port that I've seen in Texas, you know, as far as the economy and things like that.
That may be true, but appearances can be deceiving.
And you're looking up at these huge skyscrapers, and they're reflecting the light, and it's this golden feel to it. And yet, you could be looking at a building that may have 6 floors empty.
They left Houston and headed back along the Intracoastal, passing tankers, barges, pleasure boats like the Driftwood, and Coast Guard cutters. The crew had seen many of them in their travels, but this was the first time they were boarded.
Driftwood, this is the point lookout, Roger. We're going to send a boarding party over there to inspect your vessel there, Captain.
I understand. We'll be waiting for them.
It's like getting stopped on the highway by the state police. You know, they'll pull up and back here, they'll stop, and if there's 2 men, they'll approach your car very cautiously, wondering what's going on. Keep an eye, you know, search the car, ask if you have any weapons. It's very, very risky business.
They asked if they could videotape the procedure. Permission was granted.
I know down in the Florida area, the big issue now, the glamorous part of the Coast Guard duties is drug running, because that's how they make the papers. But their responsibility is safety along the water. They have to make sure that the boats traveling along are prepared for whatever might come up.
What we're checking for here is any holes in the plastic inserts inside.
There's a guy circling around in a smaller boat. The main 82-footer stands by watching.
When they were searching the vessel, someone stayed in the main salon while the 2 went downstairs. This is how they have to do it in order to protect themselves against anything that may happen.
Everything's in order. Copy here.
We passed.
Have a safe trip.
Thank you very much.
After the Coast Guard left, Driftwood headed along the Intracoastal. Next stop, a small Texas town 90 miles northeast of Houston. This is Port Arthur, Texas, after the oil bust, a town between the golden ages. This is what it must have been like when the mother lode ran out for an old western mining town. In this small corner of Texas, 18,000 oil-related jobs were lost.
Downtown is dead. Downtown is not alive, it's not moving. Grass is growing up from the sidewalks. Buildings that are standing should be torn down. And the economy there, it's stagnant.
It was here in Port Arthur they began to understand that the oil collapse was more than empty buildings. They came to see it in human terms, people out of work, struggling to get by.
Danny and Donna Jacobs exemplify what can happen to people. They're an example of victims of the oil crunch.
Donna's employed by the Fino Oil Company, and she seems to be the main breadwinner in the family, which there has to be one. I mean, the family's directly affected by the low oil prices, but thank God Donna's got this job with Fino Oil.
I've been fortunate not to be laid off. I was laid off at one time, and they called me back after 4 months. And over the last several years, all the refineries in this area have started scaling down, cutting back, laying off people, and probably about 50% of the people in Port Arthur worked in a refinery. So when they started losing their jobs, a lot of them had to leave the area, or, you know, had maybe got foreclosed on, that type of thing.
You see, like, about every other house on the where the Jacobs lived was for sale. Some of the houses were just totally run down, shot, boarded up.
Their next-door neighbor was so desperate he lowered the price of his 3-bedroom bungalow to $10,000 and found no takers.
People just don't have the money to buy around here. You know, there's plenty houses for sale. You know, it's a buyer's market, but nobody has any money.
Danny was directly affected by the drop in oil prices because when prices were up and the economy was good, people were building a lot of houses. Because Danny is a carpenter. Now, things aren't going that well.
Construction work, you know, it's going to be a long time before it gets back like it was.
The Jacobs have 3 children from former marriages, and their combined incomes barely covered the bills. So they hatched an idea.
They tried to open up a bar and supplement their income that way.
They leased it with big plans and high hopes, then learned the hard lessons that others have in the bar business. They returned it to the owner in a year, wiser and poorer.
It's not them, it's the place they live in, and they've just been victimized by this.
You know, you can't get anywhere around here. It's really, I'm tired of living here. I don't want to move.
In 1939, John Steinbeck wrote about the Joad family in his novel, The Grapes of Wrath. And then the dispossessed were drawn west, from Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, from Nevada and Arkansas. Families, tribes, dusted out, tractored out. The Jacobs family is no different from the Joads, and now they too dream of going west. Those who remain and are still in the oil business feel very fortunate, even if it means working offshore. And that's where the crew went next.
If we had done it by drift, it would have taken us a long time, and because of the weather, we did not want to attempt it.
So they got out there the same way the workers do, by helicopter.
What's the most you can hold?
It was provided by Pennzoil, the company that owns the High Island 563 platform.
Well, I had never flown in a helicopter before. It was huge. It had 4 props, seat about 12 people. We all had to wear life jackets. We suited up, got a little lecture on what to do in case we went down, which really wasn't good to hear on Friday the 13th in the weather conditions we were in.
If for any reason we go down into the water, don't get out of the aircraft until after the rotor stops and we tell you. That's about it. Buckle up, stay buckled up. Don't go chasing the stewardess.
Then finally we got off the ground. We were flying out. We could see out there a little ways. We flew out to the platform. Had about maybe a quarter of a mile of visibility.
The people who work on the platform commute by helicopter 125 miles each way. The pilots say if you can fly this route, you can fly a helicopter anywhere in the world.
We touched down on the top of the platform. There was a helipad there without railings, and I'm like, what's going to happen to me if I fall out? Well, it's a 15-story, you know, off the surface of the water. It's a pretty huge structure if you fall off.
There are dangers out here: high winds, storms, the possibility of fire. But the most common companion is tedium. There you are, far out in the Gulf of Mexico, away from family and friends, with nothing to look at but water.
My impressions before I had been out there were that it was a lot more labor intensive. And what I found when I got out there was that it's more of a maintenance of equipment and checking pressure gauges and checking to make sure that the equipment that exists is running well.
It pumps out 600 barrels of oil daily and pipes in 135 million cubic feet of natural gas. Kevin Saunier is one of the 8 men who maintains the platform each shift. The schedule never varies.
7 days on, 7 days off, 12 hours a day. There is some overtime, but not much.
What do you do in your spare time with 12 hours off?
Watch TV, play pool, cards, dominoes. That's about it.
The food that they eat out there is very great. Sort of like equate it with like a hunting camp situation, like a hunting camp out in the middle of nowhere. They can fish if they want during their off hours, and I even saw a basketball hoop out there.
But nobody plays much anymore. Once the ball goes out of bounds, the game is over. Obviously, living out in the middle of the Gulf takes some getting used to.
I enjoy being out there. I enjoy the fishing, and it's a secure thing, you know. Why leave something that you know to go to something else that you may not like, you know. I'm not one to gamble and take chances.
That's an understatement. Why else would he work on an oil platform 170 miles from home? It was a question the Driftwood crew was curious enough to pursue. So once they got back on their boat, they headed east to Kevin's house in Lake Arthur, Louisiana. When they got there, they were surprised to find out that Kevin lives on top of and owns one of the largest natural gas stakes in the United States.
Well, my grandpa bought this, I don't know exactly how many years ago, but it's 226 acres. He bought this for $12,000. Probably pays for itself 6 or 8 times every month, you know, if not more.
Is it like winning a lottery?
Yes, it sure is. Sure is. Money from heaven. They ain't got to drop the first drop of sweat. All you got to do is go to the post office.
The natural gas on his land has made Kevin a millionaire, but there is something he values more than money.
He took us out in the bayou and showed us where he fishes and with his girlfriend.
He strikes me as someone who's very content with what he's doing, and will probably keep doing it, no matter how much money he gets. What does this area mean to you?
Everything, everything. As far as this land, and you know, ain't no amount of money can buy it.
Kevin's love for this place goes back to his heritage. He's Acadian. In 1755, the Acadians were kicked out of Canada for refusing to pay allegiance to the Queen of England, who then ruled the country. They left the province of Acadia, now known as Nova Scotia, and traveled the length of the East Coast. Somehow, they ended up in Louisiana, where they developed a unique culture of their own, known to us as Cajun.
Cajun country, in search of the Cajun culture.
They found Fred's Lounge in Mamou, Louisiana, a little town 50 miles from Kevin's place. Like most Cajuns, the people around here speak 2 languages. The population of Mamou is about 3,000, except on Saturday mornings when that number swells. It's all because of Fred's and the Cajun music served up there every week by Roy Fontenot and his band.
First, we thought that was part of the Cajun culture. Maybe they all party at 9 o'clock on Saturday mornings. That's maybe a tradition that went back for centuries. Turns out the only reason they party at 9 o'clock in the morning is that they do a radio show. And that was the only time the gentleman who did the radio show could get time.
The king of this chaos is Fred Tate, owner of the bar. His ex-wife, Sue, still pours drinks. Watching her now, it's hard to believe there was a time Sue knew nothing about Cajun culture.
I didn't know how to sing, I didn't know how to dance, and I didn't know how to do anything until I married Fred Tate. And that's when I learned how to enjoy Cajun music.
That Cajun sound has put Fred's on the map. People from all over the world make their way to Mamou. And the locals say they're proud that Fred's is keeping their traditions alive. But one thing that seems to have died altogether is the memory of how the Cajuns got here and why.
I think all of us were surprised that they didn't really have that much knowledge about their ancestry and how they landed up here, as far as being expelled from the maritime provinces.
To outsiders, Cajuns are as hard to fathom as the Louisiana bayous. Not only do they have their own music and language, they have their own food.
All right. All right. Excuse me. All right. $1. C'est bon.
And one of their greatest delicacies comes from the swamps, crawfish.
You have to do a crawfish story. You can't go through Louisiana without doing a story about something that has been part of the Cajuns' food since they've been there.
When you mention crawfish ball in Louisiana, man, all your neighbors from miles around, they're going to come see you. They want to eat crawfish, too.
Larry Lyons is Cajun, too. He grew up on the bayous near Kevin Saunier, catching mudbugs.
Hey, how you doing?
They called them that because they were found and caught in the muck of the swamps. Then one day, someone discovered you could find more crawfish in the cleaner water in the rice field.
People used to come to the farmers and say, man, can I go down and catch those crawfish from your rice field? I said, sure, go ahead, catch the crawfish, all you want. And every day, every year, more and more, and first thing you knew, they had 100 people out in the field walking across his rice field picking up crawfish. He says, man, you know, I believe I can make some money doing this. So we decided to take a stab at the crawfish industry. And after we got the 60-acre pond to going real good, we expanded to roughly 250 acres, what we have now. The higher the tonnage of rice that you produce, the more food that the crawfish have to eat. So naturally, the more crawfish you can support. And on a rotation like this, you can expect to harvest anywhere from 12 to 1,500 pounds of crawfish to the acre. It requires a lot of labor because a lot of it cannot be done mechanically. Probably the most mechanical thing you've seen is the crawfish boat. He's going all over the pond. I see they've stopped in the middle of the pond. They probably run over a couple traps.
Since Larry began farming 10 years ago, the crawfish business has taken off. When he started, there were 1,500 crawfish ponds in the U.S. Today, there are 3 times that number. It's a $36 million a year industry.
90% of it's grown here in the state of Louisiana, and about 90% of what's grown in the state of Louisiana is consumed in the state of Louisiana.
and he supplies a lot of restaurants, but he's also got a huge cooker that he uses to cater events, and he has a tremendous amount of fun with it.
Oh, we've balled all over the state. We've balled crawfish for people in Dallas, and which the Dallas Cowboys, some of the Dallas Cowboys were there.
The Cajuns have been eating crawfish for probably who knows how long, but now it's getting a reputation across the rest of the country.
It's the backyard barbecue of Louisiana.
You get them together and you steam them or boil them, and the water's filled with Tabasco sauce. It's a great seafood dish.
Woo! Crawfish tonight, baby. Watch out! Watch out!
All right, spuds. That's the kind of thing you just have a lot of fun with. You put your hands in there and you go ahead and eat them.
But whatever you do, don't forget the Tabasco. It's hot stuff in these parts. In fact, folks here put Tabasco on just about everything.
Eggs in the morning, stews, even in green salads. I love Tabasco, and it wakes up the food.
The Driftwood crew met up with Dave Landry when the boat stopped at Avery Island, just off the Intracoastal. The island, which is surrounded by marshes, is right in the heart of Cajun country, about 20 miles from Lafayette, Louisiana. Dave was having lunch at the Tabasco Deli.
It belongs to McElhenney Company. It's a small store where people come out and get small items such as milk, bread, canned goods, and of course Tabasco brand pepper sauce.
The deli isn't the only thing the McElhenneys own. The entire island, Avery Island, has been in the family for generations. They own the oldest salt mine in the United States, which is right there on the island. And they own the company where Dave Landry works as foreman, the one that makes Tabasco sauce.
I think every cupboard in America probably has a bottle of Tabasco sauce. It's like apple pie in baseball, and this is the only place it's bottled.
It's a simple recipe.
It's peppers and it's vinegar and it's salt. It's very pure and it's good stuff.
The peppers are the key to Tabasco's success. They're grown right on Avery Island.
And the seeds are so precious for the plants, they even keep them in a vault. When we saw them, we were there right on time when they were planting the crop for this year.
After the peppers are harvested, they are mashed and put in barrels to ferment.
You go in and you see the barrels aging. It's just like wine almost. Some of the wines, they don't even age for 3 years.
Aging is really the secret in making Tabasco. It brings out the flavor, and add more color, and just brings out that zip.
And they take that zip very seriously. After the pepper mash is fermented, it is tested for color and flavor. As one of the plant's foremen, Dave Landry has helped with this operation over the years. But only one man can approve the mash, Paul McElhenney, great-grandson of the founder. After he approves the pepper mash, it is ready for the next step.
We went into the part of the factory where they have huge vats where they take the pepper mash that's been fermenting for 3 years in oak barrels. They pour it all in there and then they blend it with vinegar. We went in there and they lifted up the top cover and the fumes just came out and overwhelmed everybody. And then when it hit me, I just started coughing and I thought I was going to pass out.
Woo! Oh, look at you doing. Oh, man. Oh, yeah.
One of the perks of working for McElhenney is an endless supply of Tabasco.
It's true that they get a bottle of Tabasco sauce with their paycheck every 2 weeks. Sometimes a Tabasco bottle might sit in the cupboard for a year or whatever, or two, before you use the whole thing, and they get a bottle every 2 weeks. Wow.
Another more important perk is that they get to live on the island.
The island is a conservation wildlife area, and you are restricted to only certain areas on the island, unless you live on the island and work on the island.
The island is loaded with wildlife. I mean, you think of an island that has an industry such as Tabasco or something like that, you think it'd be industrial.
On its outer edge, the island juts into Vermilion Bay, an oasis from the commercial traffic that passes nearby on the intracoastal. As the crew of the Driftwood headed back out onto the waterway, they reflected on their journey along the western Gulf Coast.
The Gulf Coast was like a lesson in economics for me. What I expected to see in Texas was a big boomtown type of operation. You know, on TV you always see everything played up really big. Texas is big, wealthy, very affluent. You know, everything's longhorns and petrochemicals and that type of atmosphere. As we were traveling through, we saw a lot of depressed areas and a lot of people trying to shift to a different kind of economy just to survive.
These are people who are perhaps a little more dependent on the riding of the economy. You've got the oil industry there. You've got the shrimp industry. You've got all kinds of things that are fluctuating back and forth. And we try to paint that picture with the stories we did.
Basically, it's hard-working people, blue-collar people that are living along the Gulf there. And they're living through tough times right now. And that is a story worth documenting.
In the weeks ahead, join the crew of the Driftwood as they travel more than 25,000 miles and rediscover the stories along the waterways that link the people of North America with one another and the rest of the world. Come along as they explore man's relationship with the water he treasures and despoils, plays with and fights with, and cannot live without. Join these young people on the next leg of On the Waterways.
Funding for this program was provided by the Bamana Corporation.
Somewhere.
But he feels like he's lacking in power, and we see Josh Demuth working on the outside, trying to work his way up through the